All right, so I lied in the first video. I said that I wouldn't do any of the singing, but here we are on the third day of Christmas, and I was called out for not being merry enough and singing the song. So here we go. On the third day of NESmas, NESmaker gave to me the understanding of how the inputs in NESmaker work, because that's what we're going to do today. Yes, today we're going to look at how our input editor works with pre-existing code. We're not going to write any of our own code today. We're just going to use some code that already exists, especially in the Maze game engine, since that's what we're using. And we're going to get our character moving around a little bit, and we're going to do even a little bit more than that. We're going to learn sort of how it works and some of the advanced features that some of you who even know how to use NESmaker might not know yet. So this is going to be a multi-pronged thing. But before I go any further, please, if you're watching this and you want to get involved and you want to start making your game and you don't have NESmaker yet, you can go to www.thenew8bitheroes.com, get a license code for NESmaker, start making your game right now. You can also get on our shop this physical version, which comes with a DVD of the New 8-Bit Heroes, all about the homebrew scene. If you are a fan of retro games, all the personalities that you know are in it. It's a fun journey about bringing childhood dreams to life. Or if you just want new games to play, you can pick up our first game, Mystic Origins, which is also available on our shop while supplies last this Christmas season. So definitely check that out if it's something that you're interested. This also does come with an awesome bitbox and manual. This keeps it nice and safe and secure and clean and neat. Without further ado, let's get into how to work with inputs in NESmaker. Where we left off on the second day of Christmas yesterday is we created a game object, and we were able to actually test our game. We looked at an error that was caused. We looked at a sound effect that it was looking for that it didn't find, because we haven't talked about loading sound effects or anything like that. No problem. I showed you guys how to comment it out really easily, how to find the problem. Now we can see there's no more bug. Game is written. I can press any key to continue. It opens it up in Messin, the default emulator. And there we go. There's my character that I created. Now he doesn't do anything yet. So we need to make him do some things based on input. So what we have to do is we have to think about what it is that we want him to do. Forget normal controls for a second. Forget the idea that left causes the character to move left. That might not always be the case. What if you're in a menu screen, right? Left doesn't necessarily mean left. What if you're in like an item selection state? So we have to stop thinking about that there's some default for NES games where like left and right are move. What about up and down? Well, if it's an adventure game, it moves up and down. But if it's a platform game, it doesn't. It might do other things. Some platform games, maybe up signals, so when you press an attack button, it shoots a bomb rather than the melee weapon or something. Maybe in a platform game, down ducks. Maybe in other games, it turns you into a ball, like Metroid, right? So every game sort of has its own input scheme. What we wanted to do is we wanted to create a graphical way for you to sort of understand how the inputs were working. So this is a controller. It's really easy to see. You've got three different states a button can be in: press, hold, or release. So that should help a little bit as far as just sort of visualizing what it is that we want to make happen. How this works is we have different game states, and inside of a game state, it checks for different button pushes, and it looks for whether that button is pressed or held or released, and then it looks for the target object that you want to control with that button, which controller you're pushing, so you can actually use both controllers. And then it says, okay, if everything is in that state, if I'm in the selected game state and I've got that button, whatever state that you've got selected, for this object, that controller's pressed, for this object, run this script. So we definitely are going to need to work with scripts, even though we're not going to write any today. We need to actually know how to import them and bring them in and really think about what we want to make happen. So I'm going to, before I start working on this, I need to pull in some scripts. I've got this little plus symbol next to scripts, and I can see one of those folders is called input scripts. Now this starts me all the way back at the base sort of root folder for my project. If I double click on that, and I double click on game, you can see I've got all my modules here. And for our maze base module, we are actually going to use the default input scripts. So if we look at the maze base, we see there is no input folder here. There's no scripts for inputs here. If I look at some of the other modules, like if I look at the arcade platformer base, we can see it's got an inputs folder because it's got inputs that are specific to that style game. If I look at the Metroidvania, I can see it's got an inputs folder because it's got input controls that are specific to that game. However, for this game, we're just going to use the default input scripts. So right here at our sort of base folder, base game folder, we've got input scripts, and we've got various things that we can do. Now, understand that these won't work in every case. These will work in a particular game and not in another, and so it really depends on how your physics are set up, whatever. And we could also write easier scripts than this that are more optimized if we want. It's actually pretty easy. You can find scripts that other people have created on the forums, and you can pull them into your project. You can drop them into your folders, and then you can pull them into your folder this way. So this is infinitely expandable. What I want to be able to do is I want to start my player moving when I press a key, and I want to stop him from moving when I let go of a key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to see if I have move scripts here, and I do. I've got move down, I'm double clicking, move left, move right, move up, and I also need stop moving. And if I look under my plus sign, I can see those are now loaded into my input scripts. So I've got a scroll bar here. I can actually see moving in all four directions and stop moving are all loaded in right now. Now, this isn't changing my steps, so I'm not going to start walking or anything like that yet, but it will make my character actually begin to move. So now, in order to activate those scripts, this is what now that I've got the inputs loaded in, now I go to my input editor. And what I can say is, in my main game, and how do I know I want to use main game? That's a good question. If I go to my overworld, and I go to the screen in which I want this stuff to happen on, I can see which game state this screen uses, and it uses main game. Okay, so when I'm back at, I know that anything that transpires on this screen is going to be in the main game state. So when I go back to my input editor, if I want the inputs to control things on that screen, I'm going to select main game for my input state. And now I can actually say, okay, when I am holding the right key, or button, I should say, when I'm holding the right button, my player, on controller 1, my player is going to move right. I'm going to add that script. When I'm holding my down button, my player is going to move down. When I'm holding my left button, my player is going to move left. And when I'm holding my up button, my player is going to move up. When I release my right button, what do I want to have happen? So I'm pressing it, he's moving, I let go, that's when I want him to stop. So when I release the right button, I want him to stop moving. And when I release the down button, I want him to stop moving. And when I release the left button, I want him to stop moving. And when I release the up button, I want him to start moving. Now, a real game, a commercial game, you're probably going to get way more complicated than this. What if you're pressing up and right at the same time and you let go of the left or the right key? I'm still pressing up, but I let go of right. So the last thing it's going to see is to stop moving. That's going to stop. So we'd have to get clever with how we can get around certain circumstances, and different games are going to work in different ways. So think of these as the simple, basic, default template level input controls to get something moving around the screen. Can we get more complex than that? Absolutely. Will these codes sometimes step on each other? Sometimes, depending on which ones you load in. Don't worry, that's not a fault of NESmaker. That's just good game development. We need to start really thinking around problems to get the effect that we actually want to have. But this will get our character moving around the screen. Now, in order for this to work, let's take a look at one of these scripts real quick. So if I just click on it, it opens it up here in the internal code editor, which is pretty robust. It's not bad. If you double click on it, it'll open it up in the editor of your choice. So if you've downloaded Notepad++ and told it you want ASM files to use that, it'll open that, or otherwise it'll open it in your text editor or whatever. We can actually work with it right here in the tool. So I'm clicking on my move down script, and this does a couple of things. It's checking to see what state the character's in. This assumes that state 7 for this character will be a hurt state. That's the last action state that the object can be in. If it's not, it's going to jump to here, and it's going to start moving down. And this is a macro, if we want to understand macros. Here are the existing macros for this project right now. If I look, I have one called Start Moving, and it shows up down here. I can actually pull up that script down here so I can see what Start Moving does. When I see a macro like this, it's taking this code right here and inserting it right here. So this is doing a whole lot of things. It's jumping to a subroutine, which does this start moving in a direction. That's probably a more advanced look to understand what's actually happening. But what is important to know is that argument 0 is looking for what object are we trying to control, and argument 1 is trying to determine what direction are we talking about. Well, if I look at how this is set up here, I take the value that's in X, which is the object that I'm currently working with, is stored in my my X value right now, and I store it into the variable temp. And I use that when I say start moving temp. What that's telling it to do is start moving the object temp. And what's stored in temp was whatever object called this script originally. And it wants to know what direction. This is called a constant. Somewhere else in this engine, constants, a bunch of constants are already set up. This is one of them, down. It has the hex value or the binary value that relates to what NESmaker needs to see as down for it to work in its physics engine. So it'll run this script, which does a bunch of things which turn on the physics, which actually turn on the inertia, and it's going to start moving this object in this direction. It's also going to make him face that direction. This object is going to face that direction. It's going to change its facing position. So just wanted you to see what this does. We're not even going to change anything. I just wanted you to understand that this code is doing this. We could write all kinds of things that could happen there and all kinds of edge cases, like what if you're in an invincibility state? What if you got double speed? What if you always are supposed to be facing forward in the mode that you're in? I mean, we could do all kinds of crazy things with this if we want. What if you've reached a certain point in the screen and should you be able to move further to the right? Whatever. We can do all kinds of things more in this script, but for right now, this is going to be fine. And you'll see these are all the same, except they change to the direction that we're talking about. And then stop checks for hurt, and if it's not hurt, it stops moving. And if I want to see what stop moving macro does, I've got stop moving right here. And it's got 2 arguments. Now here I'm using 3, so I'm not sure what the third argument's doing. It looks like at one point this needed 3 arguments, and now it only needs 2. So this is a bit of redundant information that I could erase out of these movements scripts. But since it's just a 0, it's a null value, so it's probably not going to harm anything either. But what this is going to do is it's going to run stopping inertia. It's going to determine what direction I should stop inertia in, and if it's FF, means stop all directions. So what you might want to do in your game is you might want to have a situation where it doesn't stop in all directions. It stops in the direction in which you let go. So you let go of the right arrow key. It just stops moving in the right direction. That results in more ROM data being written, so more space taking up in your game. It's a little bit more complicated, but it makes for a more robust movement system, especially when you start getting into platformers and you're letting go of all kinds of keys and stuff like that. You might want to introduce that. So just thinking about how we could start to affect these scripts in small ways that have major changes. But right now, we can actually get started very quickly just by having loaded those scripts in. I'm going to go to my input editor. I can see how this works. I can read this like a sentence. With controller 1, if I'm in the main game and I'm holding the right button of controller 1, take my player 0 and move him to the right. So just reading it as a sentence from left to right. And I've got now all 4 directions, and I've got by stopping if I let go. The only other thing that I need to check is, since this uses NESmaker's sort of built-in inertia engine for its physics, that means that my player is going to need his speed and acceleration set. If those aren't set, he won't move. So if you've done your inputs and your character won't move, the first thing to check is, did you give that object speed? So I'm going to go to my game objects. I'm going to look at my player, and I'm going to go to my object details. Did I give it speed? If I go to details, I'm going to see I did not. So he's not going to go anywhere when I press the buttons. I need to give him speed, I'm going to give him a speed of 56. And I'm going to make him full acceleration speed. If that's really slow, it'll be like he's sliding on ice. All right. I'm going to make him start full board. And then I'm going to hit close. Now I'm going to test my game. It's going to open up. I'm going to press a space bar. Now, in Messin right now, if you need to set up your inputs, I can go to options and I can go to input and I can go to setup. And here's where I can determine what controls what. So for me, I've got W, A, S, and D controlling my movement. The middle keys in the middle row, G and H as select to start, and K and L as my A, B. This makes it set up sort of like a NES controller on my keyboard. For me, I like that. You can set these up however you want, and you can even plug in a controller and assign these to a controller. You just click on it and assign it to a controller, and then you can be playing with. You could be testing it with a real controller. Try and avoid aftermarket NES controllers because a lot of times the rocker in the D-pad is actually a circular rocker, and diagonals tend to work really funny. Or like when you're pressing up and just even a little bit to the right where it should just be going up, it'll try and go diagonal, and a lot of games aren't set up for that. If you want, try and get a dongle instead that goes from an actual old school NES controller to USB. Those are great. They're really inexpensive, and just get any old legitimate NES controller and one of those dongles, and that's a much better controller. So little tip that we found out along the way. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hit OK. And now that my inputs are set up, my character can move. And I can see, wow, he moves way too fast. But he does move, and he changes his facing direction. So we actually do have movement going on. And right now, nothing happens when I get to the edge of the screen because I haven't told him to do anything when he gets to the edge of the screen. So he's just circling around the numeric values to the other side of the screen. No problem. I think that's way too fast for this style of game. So I'm going to close out of this. No problem. I just go into Object Details. I go to Details. I go to his max speed, and I turn it down to 24. Well, let's see if that works better. Hit close. See if that feels a little bit more like what I want it to feel like. I think that feels a little bit better. Still might be a little bit too fast for this game, but we're going to go with that. Now, I notice he's not animating yet, right? We haven't turned on the animation. So let's think out what we really want to have happen here, and then we're going to make it happen. It's actually really easy to do, but I want to think it out first in a more complicated way so we understand the concept. What we're going to do is, I need to tell it that if I'm holding down a button, if I go into my object details, I want to change from action step 0 to action step 1. Why? Action step 1 uses the walk animation type. So when I'm holding down, up, down, left, or right, it should change to action step 1, which is walking. If I let go, it should change back to action step 0, which is idle, right? So now what we want to do is we want to find a script that can tell it to change its animation to walk, change its animation to action step 1, and then also another piece of code that can tell it to change its action step back to 0. So I'll go to my scripts. I'll click on Input Scripts. I'm going to go to Base 4.5. I'm going to go to Game. I'm going to go to Input. And you can see I've got change action to moving and change action to stop. If I were to look at change action to moving, here's what it says. First of all, it checks to see if I'm hurt. If I'm not hurt, it jumps to here. It changes the current action step. That pulls in a macro, change action step. And I can see it's got 2 arguments. Temp, we already kind of know from the other, is what object I'm talking about. And it changes 1. What argument does it see? What's that second argument? It wants to know, what step do you want to change to? Walking was step 1 in our action steps. So change action step of the temp object to 1. This assumes that walking is in action step 1 because that's not where you have to put it. So if I put change action step 5, it would change to this. Whatever I have here. It would change to this action step and do whatever I have in actions for this. So that's obviously not what I want to have happen. So what I'm going to do is, in my input editor, I only want it to change to the action step if I first tap that button. So instead of using hold, like I did with these, I'm going to say if I press the left key and I'm in the main game, and I'm in controller 1. If I press it, I want to change action to moving. I'm going to add that. If I press down, I want to change action to moving. If I press left, I want to change action to moving. If I press up, I want to change action to moving. Now, if I release right, I want to change action to stop. If I release down, change action to stop. If I release left, change action to stop. And if I release up, change action to stop. So again, I could read these like a sentence. I've basically got 4 things controlling my movement. If I'm holding the button down, it moves. And if I let go of the button, it stops. And then I've got things that change my animation. If I press the D-pads, it changes to the action step and shows that animation. If I let go, it changes to the idle animation. So let me test that. All right, so now he actually walks. So we made a ton of progress with this in a very short amount of time. That's great. We now have our character moving around the screen, and we haven't had to write a single line of code. We've got a character that animates. We've got a character that's got physics. We've got a character that can move, and we've done it all from a graphic user interface. That's pretty impressive. Let's just do some nonsensical stuff right here. Let's, just so we can see that these buttons can do anything. Let's go to input scripts. Let's go to game, input scripts. And I'm going to, let's say, simple reset. Let's take a look at what simple reset does. It just does a reset, which means it's the equivalent of pressing the reset button on your console. This is usually like a game over type thing. But let's just say, in my input editor, that when I press the B button in my main game, I'm going to reset the game. I'm going to add that script. So now in my main game, if I press the B button, it's going to reset. So we have a reset script. Let's say that was a script we pulled down from the forums. And now I want to implement a reset when I press a button. Great. I can move around like normal. If I press the B button, it resets the game. So I can move around. I press the B button, resets the game. That's how easy it is to add these inputs. Now, okay, I'm going to erase that by right-clicking and hitting remove. Let's get a little bit more complicated with this. Let's do this. If I press B on controller 2 in the main game, it's going to do a simple reset. So now I can see that I'm dealing with a second controller. Now I haven't set up a second controller yet in NESmaker, so let me test my game. And you can see I can still move around. Down here, this is just an overlay that NESmaker allows you to turn on, toggle on and off, so you can see when a key is being pressed, which is very beneficial when you're trying to debug, things that are going wrong. I press B right now. You can see I'm pressing B. Nothing's happening. Okay, let me go into my options, go to input, and I'm going to set up my second controller. And I can see I'm going to change this. So already my arrow keys are controlling up and down. I'm going to, let's see, number pad 2 and 3 are my B and A. So if I press number pad 2, that's going to act as my reset. That's as if I'm pressing controller 2. So here I am pressing controller 1, here I am pressing controller 2. And we get a reset. So I'm moving around, if I look down here, watch, I'll press B. You'll see it happen right here. Means I'm pressing what's plugged into the second controller, and it resets. So that's how easy it is for me to set up a second controller. Okay, now I'm going to erase that, remove. And what we're going to do is I'm going to make a second object here. And I'm just going to use this snowball for a second. I'll call this snowball. And for right now, we're going to get rid of this all. We're going to do something completely different with this. I'm going to go to Object Details. I'm going to make this also a persistent player. I'm going to give it a speed. I'm going to give it actions where I don't need to give it any actions because it doesn't have any animation. I'm going to give it a bounding box. I'm going to hit close. In order to make this work, I want this object to appear on the screen as well. So what I'm going to do is, we're going to get a slight bit more advanced right now. I'm going to go to my input scripts, go to game, input scripts, and I'm going to shoot a projectile. Let's take a look at that real quick. This is going to it's going to make the projectile appear on the screen. It's going to say, what object do we want to appear on the screen? Here is what this macro does, create object on a screen. Right here. And if I look at my arguments, I can see what X value, what Y value, what object, what beginning state, what screen do I want this object on. So what we've got is I take my player's position and I store it into temp A and temp B. And what object do I want to create? Object number 1, 0, 1. So this is going to create my snowball. Okay. And then beginning state wants to know, what state do I want this to be on? Well, I want it to be on state number 1, state number 0. It doesn't really matter. It's going to start it on state 0. And then what screen? The current screen that I'm on. That's the temp D there. So now when what I'll do is in my input, when my controller 1 presses the B button in the main game state, it's going to shoot a projectile. I'm going to add that script. So let's take a look at what that does. So I'm moving around and I shoot a projectile, and I've got projectiles on the screen. So I've actually got a snowball my character can now shoot. Now I haven't told it what to do when it gets to the edge of the screen. We haven't told it anything like that, but now I can shoot, and that's a whole nother step. Now let's say once that's on the screen, I want to be able to control it with my controller 2 arrow keys. Okay, so check this out. What I can do is I can say, when I hold on controller 2, what target I want to do something to the snowball. So in my main game, if I'm pressing something in controller 2, I want to do something to the snowball. If I am holding up, I want the snowball to move up. So you can see with controller 2, if I'm in my main game, if I hold up, I'm going to take my snowball and I'm going to move up. And I'll do the same thing for right, move right, down, move down, and left, move left. Now I've got all 4 directions, and I'll do the same thing with release. I'm going to stop moving. And that's all happening with controller 2. So now I basically have my player 1 creating a projectile that's now controllable by the second player for some reason. I don't know. But hopefully this is giving you some ideas of how you can make a second object that could be a player 2 object. Now, we haven't really thought about all the game mechanics all the decisions that we have to make in order to make a 2-player game. That's a whole nother can of worms, but at least we're starting to understand how the inputs work. We're learning how to control different game objects, and we're learning how to use both controllers. I'm going to press play, test. Now the snowball will move on its own because the create projectile script that I have tells it gives it an inertia. But as soon as I start pressing on my second controller, I now have 2 objects that I can move completely independently of each other. So now I have the setup for a 2-player game. I can kind of understand how to control multiple objects on the screen. The last thing that I want to do is I want to talk about states. So if I put start screen as my state, and I say that when I press start, we get a simple reset. When I press start on my start screen on controller 1 with my player, I get a simple reset. If I read this like a sentence, with controller 1, if I'm on a start screen type game and I press the start button, then I'm going to get a simple reset. If I play my game right now, I can hit my start button until my heart's content. Nothing's going to happen. So I'm going to sit here and you can see my player one, start. All the rest of these work, but it's not resetting because this is not a start screen type screen. If I go into my overworld and I go to this and I change main game to start screen, now this screen is of a game type start screen, a game screen type start screen. So if I look at this, oops, look at my input editor, none of this is going to work because all these only happen in the main game, but this one is. So I'll press play. And I'll try and move. Now he does not move. I press B, nothing happens. But if I press start, it resets. So that should give you an idea of how you can use these multiple game states. Now, this doesn't have to be, I would use 0 for main games. It's the most common one you're going to use. The next one, it doesn't have to be start screen. It doesn't have to be win screen. It doesn't have to be game state 3. I'm going to show you guys how to change these labels, and these can really represent anything you want. So if you wanted to make a game that had different mechanics from level to level, and these were all different, or like one of these screens is a special kind of password screen, or one of these is an inventory screen, and the inputs behave in a certain way, that's sort of what this is for. So you can get 8 different screen types by default out of just this GUI without even touching the code again. So that's what this is for, and we'll look at another tutorial on how you can rename them for easy reference here. So with this, I mean, we've learned how to do a lot of things as far as the input goes, and obviously there's a lot more that we can do, but hopefully that gives you an indicator of how you can start adding input scripts, how you can assign them to input controls, how you can assign different input controls to different objects, to the various controllers, and to different game states. And that should give you a lot of things to play with for your game to at least to tinker around with. I hope that helps. I hope that these are all super helpful for you and help you make cooler games. Again, don't forget, it is Christmas time. If you or anyone you know wants to get NESmaker, now's a great time. You can get a physical copy to put under a tree, or if you want a new video game to play, Mystic Origins is available as we get ready to release our magnum opus, Mystic Searches, very soon. So thank you very much for hanging. I look forward to talking to you guys tomorrow for the 4th day of Christmas.